listening to the 10 Questions with the Musical Mind podcast with your host, Peter Harris.
Hello, Greg. How are you today?
Hey, Peter. Thanks for having me on with you tonight.
Oh, no problem. It's an honor to have you. It's a pleasure. Obviously, your book, now, did it come out in 2015 or 2016, Van Halen Rising?
2015.
Okay. I actually have my copy of it right here. You were nice enough to sign it for me. But it's an incredible read. And obviously, in the Van Halen, fan world, it was a enormous success and really well done, and hopefully that's translated to a larger audience. I think it's done well. You've got a ton of positive reviews on Amazon.
Yeah, thanks. That was, I think, what my initial thought about the book was. I was hoping people like us who had an obsessive interest in Van Halen would be the one who wanted to read it, but it did transcend that somewhat, which was really kind of nice, that people who were just interested in rock bios or picked it up, and even people who just wanted to kind of tap into a larger entertainment / music / whatever story about a super important band kind of got into it too. So this, that was kind of fun for me, that there were people who told me, I don't usually read rock bios, but I liked your book because it told a good story about how these guys made it. And that was fun. But yeah, thank you. I had of course, aspirations for it, but this, it sort of, when it all kind of spun through itself over the last couple of years, it did exceed my expectations for what I thought the book would do. So that was great.
Oh, good. Van Halen is just a weird anomaly for a mega band that should be up there with the pantheon of the greats. I can find a 1976 live video of Foghat that's probably pro shot,
right.
And I couldn't care less about it. But any band that got documentation, and just you see bands all the time going, here's all the backstage footage of us, or the studio footage of us recording,
right?
X album or Y album, and there was literally nothing out of the Van Halen camp. And that's the way they've always been. So it definitely was a book that needed to be written, and I'm glad that you did it as a historian, because you got the writers do one that ends up being like an issue of Teen Beat, where it's just fawning over it, and it's not a whole lot of historical accuracy. So I definitely appreciate it, is the fact that you researched it.
Yeah, thanks. That's what I really thought as a historian I could bring to the table with the book, was to try to fill in a lot of the gaps. I even remember before I started it, I remember reading Wikipedia, and I'd read things and I go, that can't possibly, I kind of look at the chronology of dates, and how Wikipedia is. Sometimes the entries are accurate for bands, are fairly accurate, but there's oftentimes these other entries where you look for the bands and you're like, this doesn't make any sense. And even the thing about, for me, was when they got signed, there used to be these notations on Wikipedia that said they got signed in October 1977, and or all these different, or the album was recorded, in October, and I'm thinking, I just it didn't all quite add up, because I kind of knew, it's pretty difficult to finish an album in October and then have it out. It's basically out and finished in a record store at the beginning of February. And I kind of thought about that in terms of, those are the types of questions I wanted to answer, sort of the things that seem like we were talking about before we started recording, kind of the thing that maybe only 20 people would be interested in, but also I kind of knew that type of digging might open up the story. And that was one of just an example of something that was really eating at me for a lot of time. And I actually remember very distinctly, I was sitting in a library in Oklahoma City, and I was reading a underground newspaper. It was basically like a free newspaper that you could pick up at a head shop or at a record store in LA in the 70s. It was called the LA Free Press. And I remember reading it and reading through these issues, and there was occasional mentions of Van Halen, very small, because they weren't a signed band. It would be Van Halen's playing the Starwood tonight. And I remember scrolling through in February 1977, just kind of passing, and I stopped and I looked and I saw Van Halen, and it said Van Halen has signed a record deal with Warner Brothers Records. And I was like, there it is. That's when they signed. And basically that sort of unlocked a lot of the band history for me, in terms of how they ended up going from an unsigned band to a signed band. I mean, that sounds, again, I think a lot of people probably like, well, who cares? But to understand how they made it and how long it took them to get signed and all these other things, and sort of when the record actually got made, which they got made in the late summer of '77. It all sort of fell into place in terms of thinking about what I wanted to do to document the band, which, like you said, just not gloss over the stuff and write the beginning of the band's history in 3 paragraphs and then start talking about, the first Van Halen tour or whatever. I wanted to really sort of unearth that period of time I was interested in, which was like that really nobody I thought knew very much about, including me.
And it has not been covered in depth by anybody before you, so that's great. And I was talking to another musician, and he was alluding to the fact that oftentimes, if not management, other band members themselves will prompt a band member, especially decades past, to fabricate a story about a song or an album or when they got signed and the story behind it, and they would just run with that with the press, just make up just ridiculous stuff. And then as years go by, it becomes increasingly apparent, like, well, that doesn't make any sense logically. Like, this doesn't fit that, or the timeline doesn't fit, but that was the norm sometimes. So and it wouldn't pass muster in the internet age, but in mid '70s, late '70s, it was easily doable.
Right. The kind of the example there was that Dave particularly, and all the guys in the band after a while started saying this, they had said they got signed on a rainy Monday night or something like that. And that actually threw me off for a long time. Now, I'm not saying there wasn't any rain. In LA there can be a passing shower, but you're looking through these days, and then eventually I find this notation about when they got signed, and I kind of look back to see when they could have played with Starwood, and then I actually looked at the weather in Los Angeles in the newspapers and looking, and it wasn't any rain. And I sort of realized that probably that was part of the embellishment, sort of raining, nobody around. And Ted Templeman just, that was the other thing, was like Ted Templeman just wandered in, like he was like on the street, like, panhandling or something. And going to get out of the rain. He just came into Starwood, which wasn't what had happened at all, actually. But,
Ted Templeman and Mo Austin were just, ran out of gas and wandered in looking for a payphone. And that's and sort of all that stuff, sort of like you're saying, those sort of origin myths that become part of how a band wants to build itself. Motley Crue, say we're from the street or whatever. They don't just, even Van Halen would say that stuff. It's just all part of this myth making that bands would do to kind of help them, go from, I didn't grow up in the suburbs. I grew up like on the streets or something. Right. Living in a cardboard box behind, a grocery store or something like that. In recent,
and then I picked up my bass and we formed a band, and we made it.
Well, in more recent times, I guess that's carried on because no rapper was going to say, "Oh, grew up in the suburbs and I was in the chess club."
Right.
They all grew up, quote unquote, on the streets hustling.
Right.
And so a lot of that's probably just complete fabrication, but
it's
and I guess if you're looking at it as a viewpoint of it's an art form, it does serve a purpose. If you look at it as entertainment and not just a lie, then you understand where they're going with it.
Yeah, I mean, actually, it brings up a really interesting analogy in my mind, which I always think about. It's sort of, in 1985, if you read interviews with David Lee Roth, he talks a lot about pro wrestling. Like '84, like he starts talking about even the feud with Van Halen. He says it's like pro wrestling, and I don't know if he was trying to basically turn down the intensity on the quote unquote feud or whatever, or if it was actually legitimately he was thinking this. But it's sort of, that's part of it too, is this sort of theatrics to it, right? Where you want to build up your band and talk about you did this, you did that, you do all this stuff, and you want to create this myth that becomes part of the public face of the band, in the same way as pro wrestling and sort of this, obviously it's theatrical, and it's yes, the guys are falling on their back and landing and hurting, maybe hurting themselves, but it's also obviously rigged and fake or whatever you want to say.
Right.
It's the same type of thing where you sort of want to put up a public persona for people to consume for the entertainment value, and I think that's part of what that's all about too. These, all these bands did it to one degree or another. That did that, but to kind of circle back to the original point about the lack of information coming from Van Halen. I mean, that was the other thing too. It was kind of maddening to me that you couldn't pick up a book and have. I mean, there've been so many books written about Led Zeppelin or the Beatles or Rolling Stones, and they all varied in quality. And there were some that were really good. I thought some were not so good. Same thing with Van Halen. There were some books I thought that made a good shot at stuff, but a lot of those books had to kind of gloss over the early years because there was really nothing that was easily accessible to anyone who was trying to write a book. And so I sort of took the long view of it, started doing these interviews with people who had grown up with the guys and hired them for parties or gigged with them and those types of things to sort of get the stories, because I kind of realized that, there's no real newspaper coverage. There's no flyers that are beyond sort of the flyers with the dates on them. You're not going to be able to kind of get to the stories beyond what the band members had told you, which was, again, part of it was actually more true than you ended up thinking, like the backyard parties, but other stuff.
Well, now was there certain amounts that like things you thought were interesting that you left out because like I can't corroborate this with anybody else? This one guy says XYZ amazing happened, but I have no way to verify that.
Yeah, there were some things like that. I mean, there was, and occasionally some things that were kind of, I just didn't have enough meat on the bones. And one of the things that kind of worked to my advantage would be these backyard parties. And there would be, it was pretty easy when you started talking to people in Pasadena to get 24 people to tell you about a certain party. And once you had 24 people kind of telling you generally the same thing, you sort of had a pretty good sense that probably was the way it kind of happened. Obviously, the years go by, people's memories are going to get fuzzy. Yes, things could, people were drunk, people were high, things are going to get embellished. But you sort of kind of can put together the basic outlines and stuff. And then there were other things that, there was Van Halen has supposedly played the Sweet 16 party, and I'll leave out the details because I never able to fully verify it. But there were sort of some interesting things that supposedly happened at this Sweet 16 party that, I wouldn't have felt comfortable kind of based on like one person telling me the story, basically. And that's the thing, too. It's interesting about the whole Red Ball Jet part of the book, which is Dave's first band. I always want to try to make sure to underscore that to people that, to me, Red Ball Jet was the prototype for so many things that came later with Van Halen, that everything that basically Dave eventually instituted with Van Halen, it took a while with the brothers, especially because they were not as into the entertainment side. I mean, they basically, went for it in a lot of ways. And that to me really was a great insight into what Dave saw as entertainment when he first started out. And then later, all I can tell you is that when I watch the Hot for Teacher video, I always think about Red Ball Jet, because that's one of the things that Dave actually had them try to do, was to learn what was called Motown Step, which was basically, if you ever watch like old Wilson Pickett videos, when they were going to audition to play in these nightclubs, that's what Dave kind of wanted. He wanted to have a little bit of a review feel to it, where it was, they were playing Rolling Stones, but the guys sort of dressed the same and did some moves, so, to do something kind of harkening back to that 60s R&B stuff that Dave liked. And so it seems sort of ludicrous, but then of course you watch the Hot for Teacher video and you realize that Dave's like, yeah, we should still do this. And if these guys can't dance, even better. Like that's
the best part is the one who can't dance is the drummer.
Yeah,
he has no rhythm.
Of course, yeah. So all that stuff. It all kind of started to fall into place for me and help me as a fan and as a historian kind of make sense of why the brothers might have been, for example, uninterested at first in hiring Dave, because his vision of what entertainment was so different from what they saw music as, which was much more replicate the records. Right. Don't be super into showmanship. It's not about the show. It's about the music. The music is the show. We play great and people will be awed. And they were these young teenagers playing these no for no covers of these songs. Whereas Dave was much more about like, hey, I'm going to put on a girl's blouse and tight leather pants and dance in the backyard and make a show out of it. And so when all those things kind of come together, you get the musical sophistication matched with the entertainment. That's what sort of, Red Ball Jet meets Van Halen.
Yeah, it was the magic.
I'm sure the brothers, if they would angrily denounce that viewpoint that Red Ball Jet had anything to do with their band's development, but in some ways that meaning that what Dave inserted into the mix, you kind of could see very clearly in Red Ball Jet, because he was unfiltered, so to speak. He sort of, I don't know if he ran that band, but he was very, very willful in how he wanted to do things. And the other guys kind of let Dave lead because, as you can imagine, he was a very driven person, had this vision for what he wanted to do.
Oh, so driven. And, even like little things, talk about the lack of information. There's little quotes over the, 40 years.
It's interesting. Yeah. Terry is, if you're not friends with him on Facebook, you should friend him on Facebook. He's a very smart guy. He also has a very, very unique way of seeing the world, and it's interesting. I always think about how, if you can imagine Roth being willful and how he is paired up with Terry, it must have been like, I can't imagine those guys trying to be in a band together. But but Terry mentioned at some point where Ed acknowledged in an interview in Guitar World magazine, where Ed said something like, the first time I ever heard a phaser pedal, Terry Kilgore, a friend of mine who was kind of my guitar rival, kind of said friendly guitar rival had one. And actually Terry said that was the first time that Ed had ever acknowledged him in print.
Huh.
It's just one of those things. That's how it sort of worked out, that Terry was for people who don't know, Terry Kilgore was kind of the local competition for Ed. They were buddies. I mean, they weren't they weren't enemies at all. They were friends who had rival bands, kind of like guys who ended up on opposite football teams or something like that in the same town, who had to play each other once a year. And Terry just didn't end up with Dave, right? He didn't end up with the songs.
Right.
The song, he had maybe had the ability to write the songs, but he did not have the guy who could kind of sell the songs. And Terry went on to play with Dave and write songs for some other people and stuff like that. But yeah, very, very innovative guitar player. And if you ever check out his stuff, there's a couple of clips around, and he did the stuff for Dave, and there's some other stuff around where he was very unique and
he's a talented player.
Yeah. And so that was one of those things that for those guys to know. I mean, that was all part of the circle of guys who were around back then in Pasadena. And it was really quite a hotbed. Those bands, like even like Armored Saint, some of these other bands that came later. There were guys who came from Pasadena and all went through Pasadena City College later. This is like in the early '80s, late '70s, and stuff like that. It's interesting to think about how that all sort of started in out of the backyards of Pasadena and kind of became this thing to form rock bands, in part because Van Halen was such an inspiration to all those bands that came later, that they thought we can do it. There's the guy who threw the big backyard party in Pasadena and San Marino, his guy's named Jack Van Frische, actually had Oingo Boingo play in his backyard in like 78 or 79 or something like that. Like basically the same thing. It was like, just a different type of music. It was new wave music, but they played in the backyard, and Oingo Boingo went on to be a successful group.
That was a great bass player too. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. But now I want to go into another part. You as an author, obviously the Van Halen Rising was a work of passion on your part. Was there a similar internal drive for you to write your previous book, The Big Tent, which for the listeners, you did a history of the traveling circus in Georgia, and I'm going off memory, 1890 to 1930, is that correct?
Yeah, so how that all worked out, that was, I went to grad school and got a PhD in history, and you write a dissertation, and one of the things you end up doing after you get your academic job, I was teaching at a university in the Midwest, and you turn your dissertation into a book. And the thing about that is that actually, if you look at that book, that was my way of trying to make sense of, in some ways, of the history I wanted to write about this entertainment form, but also I was kind of filtering through my own experiences going to rock shows as a kid, and all the tailgating, all the stuff that went on before these shows. And when we would go to the shows at Giant Stadium in the Meadowlands, we would get there early and drink and party and all this stuff. And so one of the things the book The Big Tent talks about is the importance of what Circus Day was, which was the 2 or 3 days of the year when these big shows would come to Dalton, Georgia, or Raleigh, North Carolina, wherever they were. The circuses would come by railroad, and the towns would basically kind of shut down. It was like a local holiday. And so I was like, it was kind of like when I went to see Iron Maiden or something like that. We would get off work early and get down there, and we'd drive. I mean, my friends would figure out how to buy beer, get someone to buy us beer, and we'd drive down there and we'd party before the show. And that was to me, and thinking about these big entertainment forms inside out of a tented arena that all these people were interested in going to, and what these shows were like before and after. There were parades, and there were sort of a rowdy environment that these shows actually attracted at the time. So it was in some ways, after I wrote it or kind of got into it, I realized I was kind of channeling the that whole period of time of my own years as a teenager going to these shows. And actually, one of the pictures in the middle of the book, if you ever see a copy of the book, there's actually a picture of all these wagons in this town that have come to town from the country to see the circus. And so people just park them all over the place in this field. And I actually called the picture in the book, I called it like Circus Day Parking Lot or something, like heavy metal.
Yeah. Now, talk about the Big Ten again. What was harder about that? Obviously on that book, and that was your first foray into it, was that more difficult research being further back and it was all written accounts, or was it harder with Van Halen Rising because of the tendency for eyewitnesses to contradict each other?
The thing about the Van Halen book was the bulk of it was oral interviews. So people who were, worked for Van Halen. Tom Broderick would be an example of a person. Like, some people might know that name. Tom Broderick worked as Van Halen sound man from 76, 75 up through about 78. You do these interviews with these individuals who had experience with those guys day to day. And then I would tape these conversations, obviously, on the phone, and then you have to transcribe them. So, if you do 230 interviews like I did, that's a lot of transcribing. And I was actually telling somebody that they were like, how many did you do so much transcribing? And for me, the secret was that I would try to do that transcribing almost immediately after I do the interview. So I would actually, this is before I had kids. And so I was able to stay up later and not be up at the crack of dawn with the kids, but I would actually do the interview, and then I would sit down with the tape almost immediately afterwards. And I go, okay, this person, whoever it is, John Smith, talked about, something important at this party. I want to talk about, 15 minutes through the tape, through about 25 minutes, and the rest of it was sort of filler stuff. People, you talk about all sorts of stuff when you have these conversations with people, and you end up with some interviews that are packed from beginning to end with information that's really, really valuable, and then some stuff that you sort of realize, well, this doesn't really focus on what I want to focus on, and where you can just sort of take notes where you go, okay, they talked about X, Y, and Z, and then transcribe the part that was there. But yeah, I found it was much more difficult if you have a recording you did 2 months later to go back. And eventually I actually fell behind. It just was inevitable. I ended up trying to start to write the book, and I didn't keep up with the transcription as quick as much as I did. So to compare to doing the Big Tent book, which was a lot of archival research, reading old newspapers, it was definitely difficult. But just the whole idea of just sort of having to create your own source by having to transcribe the interviews, that was a very tedious project. But on the other hand, it was also really, really cool when I get off the phone with somebody. I talk to someone like, I don't know, Rusty Anderson, who's Paul McCartney's guitarist, and I did an interview with him, and he had been in a band called Eulogy, which anyone who's ever seen some posters from the Whiskey or from the Starwood, Van Halen and Eulogy played some shows together, and he had some really good stories. It'd be really exciting. Like, this is really cool, because no one had really asked him about, he'd be like, oh, no one really ever asked me about Van Halen. Okay, I'll talk to whoever. Some of these guys are like, well, I haven't thought about that stuff in years. And then they would say, yeah, no one ever asked me about it. And they tell you this stuff. So it's cool.
Yeah, that's pretty neat. You're right about transcribing interviews. I've done some immediately after the fact, and it's tedious, or time consuming, I should say. But it's not terrible. Then I've done some where I record the interview, and 3 weeks later, I've got to, transcribe. I'm like, I got to dive into all this and just sort through just tons of stuff. Like you were saying, it's almost more daunting the more time goes on.
Yeah, it is. And at some point, for me, the book was still far from written. It was like 2012 or something like that. But I had sort of gotten to the point where I was building momentum, and I could sort of see it started to take shape, and it was getting to be where it was also had networked with enough people where it was, I don't want to say it was easy to get interviews, but it was becoming easier, where I could say, I've talked to person X, person Y, person Z, will you talk to me? And then those people would vouch for me, the first 3 people, and that person would talk. Where at the beginning, the people were like, who? Like, what? And at the end, I'm not trying to flatter myself to pretend I'm something I'm not, but occasionally people be like, well, what high school did you go to in Pasadena? I'm like, no, I live in Oklahoma or whatever. I'm from New Jersey. They're like, what? Because I knew all these names of all these people. Right. But I'd be like, oh yeah, like Steve Jones or like Tom Smith. And they'd be like, yeah. Like, they think like I went to high school. And I'm like, no, I don't know them. I just interviewed them, and I kind of like putting the things in line or whatever, so it was kind of entertaining from that standpoint too, that you had that knowledge built up about the way sort of the band scene was in Pasadena and on the Strip, but also it helped me. You end up with some sort of credibility after a while, where people are like, oh yeah, if you talk to this person will vouch for you. I'll talk to you. Sure. Or at the beginning, the first few people are like, who? What?
That's the hard part.
You almost like beg your way into talking to people, and you really had to like sell it, more. Where leaving later, obviously, you had to sometimes more. Some people were a little bit more, hesitant for whatever reason. But for the most part, like, oh yeah, if you know these people, it's fine. I'll talk to you about it.
Right. So. That's the hard part, is diving into getting the first 2 under your belt, or first 3. But
right.
Now I was going to ask you, as part of your, historical and academic discipline, was the organization of your research, was that part of your college experience? Like, is there a method to that? Like, okay, here's how you keep things organized, or is that basically up to you to figure out how to, because obviously it's probably hard to make an outline of the book before you have all the research done.
Yeah,
you don't know what direction it's going to go in.
Yeah, I think one of the things about graduate training in history is that from the beginning, you're being taught how to research and then how to write. So the organization of the research, you want to obviously find a system where you can kind of keep track of where all the pieces are. And everyone does their own sort of way. I don't think there's not really it's not like if you're an archivist, you're kind of trained where, there's certain ways to archive things and do things in a way that's very systematic. And then you're not necessarily a historian trained that way, but you're trained in how to organize information and then to think about how to present it in a way that can be digested by the reader. So this type of book, you could do you could write a book about Van Halen where it'd be like Van Halen in the suburbs, Van Halen and punk rock. You could do topical, you could do Van Halen and the Guitar Hero and sort of go through all these different themes. But for this type of book, it was pretty obvious from the beginning, it had to be a chronological story because we want to know how you get from point A to point B, and it was not meant to be an analytical book. It was going to kind of break it down by topic. There are certainly, I think there's that book that was written about Van Halen. It's what is it called? I can't believe I'm flopping on the name of the book, but it's the book with California in the title. It's a really good. It's an academic book actually, and that.
Not the Zen or
Zen California Zen. Yes, and I actually apologize if the author I cannot pull.
I apologize too, but I know what book you're talking about.
Yeah, he's actually a really good writer, and I've actually spoke to him online a couple of times in emails. A very nice guy, and that's exactly what I mean. Like that book, I really like that book, and that's one way to write that book. But I sort of realized this sort of book, in terms of trying to organize the story and tell what I wanted to tell, it had to be a kind of a chronological. When you're doing in some ways, a rock bio, for lack of a better term, it was meant to be laid out like that. And so one of the ways I was going to try to organize it, obviously, was thinking about, okay, what piece goes where? Well, there's all the Red Ball Jet stuff goes together. Okay, there's all the stuff about, let's say, the whiskey in 1977, the first world tour. Dave joins the band. And the other thing you learn in doing this type of research is that you have to let your sources in some ways drive the way you write the book, which is that there were those very big parties. I didn't necessarily, when I first started thinking about the book, think that, I'm going to write a whole chapter about one of these big parties. But there was more than enough there that I realized this was an important thing. And especially when people started talking about the fact that they thought that there's a certain party that took place in 1974 in November, that the police broke up with kind of came in with billy clubs and threw some tear gas in the backyard or whatever, like smoke grenades or whatever, to kind of break this party up, was kind of that the parties had gotten so big and so out of control that the police responded in a completely, in some ways, ridiculously inappropriate way that they broke it up. But I sort of realized, this was a kind of a symbol of how big these, Van Halen was kind of the biggest of these party bands, but this was something that was going on. A lot of bands were trying to replicate that, and that was how they would make a name for themselves. We can't play a club because we don't have a record. So we can't play the Starboard. We can't play the Whiskey. We don't have enough material to play a nightclub. But hey, guess what we can do? We can, $3, all you can drink kegs and make flyers up to sort of send the message to basically the bands that we're going to start impounding your equipment and we're going to basically, punish your fans, which is what they basically did, was make these people, pay the price, put them in jail, kind of beat them up. And that became a chapter in the book, because I learned enough from enough people to go, that's kind of an important thing, where it wasn't sort of, where I knew Dave joining the band, obviously, even before I got into the research, that would probably be something I'd like to write a chapter about.
Absolutely, yeah.
Van Halen gets signed by Warner Brothers. That's something I'd like to write a chapter about.
I'm going to ask, because I've done some writing, and one thing I've got to commend you on is what I have found personally difficult is it's not that easy to write a nonfiction book and have it not come across as an encyclopedia. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
It's very difficult, and it's a personal observation. That's something I appreciate.
Yeah, I appreciate that very much, because I have to tell you that most academic training, including that what you end up with is you end up with if people picked up my first book, The Big Tent, it's not like Halen Rising. It's an academic. The writing is academic. As I said, it's much more driven by subject matter. Right. There is chronology in there, but it's much more driven by topics than it is by chronology in some sort of ways. And so it's not meant to be a book that you like pick up at the beach and just read, where, in some ways, I guess Halen Rising is that type of book that you could sort of pick it up and put it down and pick it up and put it down and keep reading it. And so, yeah, that was actually a very difficult thing for me to do. It was almost like, it's like in Rocky, where Rocky changes his whole style to punch with whatever left hand, right hand, or whatever.
Right.
I had to do something like that because I sort of realized that I wanted the book to be engaging, and I also recognized that this was a very compelling story of hard work, success, dedication to your craft, overcoming all sorts of things that would normally torpedo these types of efforts to do these types of things. That I wanted to be something that would do justice to the story. And so, yeah, it was actually a whole reinvention of my writing style in a lot of ways. And I'm glad it shows that I was actually very grateful to my mentors who trained me well enough as a writer, and all those years of writing these papers about these topics that in retrospect you're like, what the hell was I doing, grad school writing about these topics? But you become someone who can write. Like, if you're a baseball player, you learn how to hit the baseball and catch a baseball, and you go to grad school in whatever, English, political science, history, you're going to learn how to write. And so I had the facility to sort of think about how to work on my writing style, but it was because it was not as easy as it looked. Right. It looked easy. It wasn't easy to write. That was actually one of the harder things, was to kind of make it readable, because as you're trained as an academic, it's not the way most academics training is done. It's just, you're not thinking like, oh, make it readable. It's to make it dense and make it something that's delivering a lot of information and knowledge and insight in a very, very deep way to a very small number of people who are interested enough to say, I'm interested in what traveling circuses were like in the late 19th century. That's an interesting topic, but it's also a very, very narrow group of people who are going to want to go, I'll pick up a book about that. And for those people, they probably already got some sort of knowledge about that. They're already like 8 books into the reading before they read your book. Right.
Yeah. They're not picking that up on a whim. It's something they're already invested in. Right.
Right.
But yeah, I think it's mission accomplished. I think it's a great balance between the two approaches, and it's hard to come across as personal and inject. You want to inject personality in your writing style, but not inject your personality per se.
Yeah, I think it's a good way to put it.
Yeah. So let's go off topic a little bit, talking about Van Halen. I threw you in a little random question here. You're familiar, of course, with the tune Source of Infection off OU812?
Mm-hmm.
True or false? I've always argued that, obviously, Van Halen fans know that since Dave got back with the band and the last decade or so, they've stuck to the Dave era. And Eddie has his solo that he's done, and of course we don't know if they'll tour again, but his solo's been pat for years and years. I've always argued that tapping intro to the song Source of Infection would be the perfect thing to throw into a solo piece. It wouldn't deviate too much. The hardcore fans and the guitar players in the audience would totally get it. It would be a nod to the Sammy years without involving Dave. Dave doesn't have to acknowledge that a Sammy tune is being played. Dave doesn't have to acknowledge it anyway, but just the musicians in the audience or the savvy listeners would be like, he's doing something new. It's a pretty complex tapping pattern. I'm a terrible guitarist myself, but even I know just the mechanics of it. It's a little bit more than your basic B string up and down the string tapping run. Do you have any opinion about ways he could have done somewhat of a nod to the entire second half of his career that he's ignored?
I don't know. I think it's interesting. I almost think that Eddie expects people want to hear Eruption, basically like the same type of live take on Eruption that he's been playing for. I think he thinks of it as it's almost like Running with the Devil or Jump. Like, you don't want to like totally play a a jam version of Jump or something where people are like, well, that doesn't sound like the record. But I almost think that's kind of like what he's caught up in is he's like, well, this is what people expect. And so, yeah, I think it's kind of interesting to think about Eddie as a guy who obviously, if he wanted to, could do an enormous amount of just sort of off the cuff type of playing on stage, and it would be great and people would love it, or kind of take risks on stage doing his long solo and people would love it. Something like, like Jeff Beck does, where he sort of pushes himself in different directions and you're not really going to get the same stuff over and over again. But I almost think like he sees it as a composition that you want to stick to. I mean, I would love for him to do different stuff in those live slots. And I can't tell you that I've off the top of my head can think about how similar the 2007, the 2012 to 13, the 2015 solos were to each other. Like there's basically always been like sort of like eruptions. It seems to me it's always been the basic format for that whole solo piece.
He's jumbled the arrangement, but since 1986, it's been 316, Eruption, Spanish Fly, Mean Street Intro, Cathedral.
Right.
Vary the order and throw in some licks in between. It's been that, but you don't really know what is Eddie hearing. Like, what is his feedback? Is it an isolated little bubble where he's it's just hard to say what they're hearing. Like, do they really get feedback from the outside world or I don't know. So
I mean, to your point that there are other little probably guitar things that he could play off of some of these records. Yeah, there's some of the later records. I think. Yeah, I mean, I don't think that people are going to walk out of a Van Halen concert going, I didn't recognize every single riff and lick that he did in his solo, his standalone solo, and so I feel disappointed. That's the thing. So even if it's sort of more obscure, I don't know.
No, he has the luxury of being able to get away with that, of playing whatever he wants and throwing in the nods to the obvious pieces, and the fans will love it. I mean, his stature permits that. But that's kind of my take on it too. I mean, even some of the, maybe some of the like the tabletop guitar stuff from the Fuck record or something like that, where from Judgment Day or something like that. Even like that would be kind of like, oh, look, Eddie's bringing out the tabletop and he's going to do that thing. That would be cool. Even if people were like, I don't know what that is, but still be cool. They'll love it. And he mentioned one time an interview with, I don't remember if it was Guitar World, Guitar Player, who knows, probably early 80s. He mentioned one time that he's like, I'd like to, instead of play my solo piece, play the instrumentals before each song as they appear on the record. So in other words, play Eruption before you go into You Really Got Me.
Right.
Play Cathedral before you go into Secrets, or am I getting the order wrong? Anyway, but and just play those as they appear on the record instead of doing one long solo piece. And I was like, I would be totally about that. Get 6 different little independent Eddie moments in a concert instead of one solo.
And they did that on 84, right? He did Cathedral kind of like right before House of Pain on the first 20 minutes or so of the concert or whatever. But yeah, a lot of that stuff you kind of realized was so those guys could take a break. Like, I'll talk for, Dave will talk for 10 minutes and Eddie will play Cathedral for 5 minutes, and then we'll all get to take these breaks by, whatever. So that sort of was the motivation for that. But yeah, I mean, I think I have no idea. Again, I have no idea. I've never spoken to Eddie Van Halen. I've never heard him speak about this. I don't know anyone who's ever spoken to him about this. It's my gut feeling is that he kind of thinks that that's what people expect, is the eruption that has always been, and again, that's look, Eddie's obviously a big part of the show, right? That's what people would, if he didn't do a solo, people would be disappointed. People would be like, well, he didn't do a solo. Like, he didn't do Eruption. And so
I would feel
there's no
cheated.
question if he didn't do it, people would be disappointed.
So going back to when you finished Van Halen Rising, after spending all that time on it, how hard was it to shop the book to be published? I mean, did you ever consider self-publishing or?
So I did consider it, although not seriously, because I kind of understood that, it's. I mean, the good thing is if you self-publish, you basically make like 90+% of the money.
Right, but
when Amazon takes a little bit, you get most of it, and there's the self-publishing route on Amazon is actually a good one for a lot of people, but for me, I didn't want to be, I didn't have a quote unquote big platform. Nobody knew who I was. And so it wasn't, it wasn't as if I could just go on my Twitter with my 2 million followers and be like, hey, I've self-published this book, buy this book. And people would suddenly jump to buy the book. So I was interested in having a press do the book. The thing that I ran up against was, number one, I'd never written a rock bio before, and I'm an academic historian. So number one, it was already when my agent shopped the book, there was a lot of skepticism that would kind of come through. That they wouldn't necessarily come out and say it, but you could read between the lines that, well, yeah, I'm going to pass, and the reason they're passing is because this guy has no track record of selling books. He wrote a book that sold 300 copies, the academic book, The Big Tent, and what makes us think that this guy can write a book that people are going to want to read? So there was that. The other thing was there was a lot of people. You have to find somebody who kind of got Van Halen, and ECW Press, I think, got it. Well, a lot of people were just like, well, Sammy just wrote a book, so why would we need another book on Van Halen? Right? There was that. Okay. And then the other piece of it, which is the big one, was that people said to me, the couple of bigger presses that I won't mention who they were, but they're big presses were like, oh, this sounds interesting. Let's get Dave to write it with you. Let's get Eddie to write it with you. Kind of thinking along the lines of, well, Gene and Paul write books with Ken Sharp. Right. Ken Sharp's a really, really good writer, and he partners with those guys to basically interview them. He puts the books together, and they come out, and they're basically co-authors. So what about that? And I tried to explain, well, that's never going to happen in a million years. Right. That Eddie Van Halen's not going to write a book with me, and he's probably not going to write a book with maybe one day, but as far as I know, to that point, he had no aspiration to write a book with anybody. And David Lee Roth has written a book, and what's in it for those guys? And so they were sort of like, well, if you don't have the Sebastian Bach, if you don't have the Eddie Van Halen, if you don't have the Sammy Hagar, if you don't have the David Coverdale name that kind of go out there and push the book, it's not going to sell. And I'm not to flatter myself. My book didn't sell anywhere near as many copies as Sammy's book or some of these other books. So there's something to that, right? If you have the star, obviously, if you're Sammy Hagar, you're going to have a book, right? You're going to sell a lot of books to people who are Van Halen fans or fans of you. And if you're Sebastian Bach, you're going to be able to sell a lot of books because you're Sebastian Bach, and you can go on the radio shows and the TV shows and do whatever. But that wasn't the avenue I wanted to go. It wasn't going to be a book that was meant to be sort of blessed by those guys, and it wasn't meant to be a book that was going to be co-authored. It just wasn't, it wasn't going to be something that was going to be pasted on at the end. So that happened with a couple presses, and so
what they probably didn't get was
it took longer to get a deal. And go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say what they probably didn't get is that makes sense from a business standpoint, but what they didn't get is, no, Eddie's never going to write this book. Eddie's never going to co-write this book. Like, that's why you have to leave it to somebody to pick up the mantle, because they never will indulge the fans like this.
Right. I mean, I think like, for example, someone like, Scott Ian. If you said Scott Ian, I want to write Anthrax Rising, and I've done all this research. Like Scott Ian, I don't know him, but he's written a book where he might sit down and go, oh, okay, this is actually a pretty cool idea. You've done all this research and all this stuff. I'll fill in the gaps. I'll take 75% of the money. You take 25, and we'll call it a deal. Whatever. So there are people who might go for it, but not understanding the dynamics of Van Halen. So there were a lot of like, it sounds good, but good luck with that, basically. It sounds interesting, but we're not going to do it. So, and then the other stuff was like, well, when's anyone going to care? Like, where's the Sammy Hagar, David Lee Roth battle? Where's that's what we need more. Like, we need more of the people who did know, or more like we need more of the sort of conventional stuff. And I was like, well, that's the point of the book. Is that we already know that. Like, that's already been beat to death. It doesn't mean you can't write a book about that, but this was meant to be something that was going to shine a light on a part of their history that nobody really knows much about. So it's all good. I mean, and ECW Press did a fantastic job, and it was never like I felt let down by that. Oh, they just made an offer, and it's like, okay, you guys want to do it? Great. And
So what can we look forward to next? Do you have any aspirations? Like, is there another band or artist or genre or art form that that piques your interest that you might want to write a book on in the future?
Well, the book I'm working on right now is I'm working on Ted Templeman's authorized biography.
Great.
So that has been kind of in production, so to speak, where I've been working on it, I've been writing it. And so I'm getting towards the end. I'm closer to the end than I am to the beginning now. It's for me, it was a fact of, grew out of the fact that I got to know Ted from writing the Van Halen Rising book. And we spent some time together in Pasadena where he was kind enough to come into the book event I did there, which was amazing, and answer questions. And he was actually really, so I think, amazed himself, like how many fans were like so into like Van Halen. Not that he didn't know they were a big band, but they were like, sign my record, Ted. Like, he just sort of, I think he was sort of like, oh wow, people really care still. Like, he knew that people still listen to music on the radio and stuff like that, but it's sort of, you're 70 plus years old and you've retired from the music industry. You're not walking around like checking Van Halen links about what are the people saying about Van Halen. But he sort of was, willing to then do some reminiscing with me, and was, kind of thinking about, kind of got his memories going. And I asked him to do the book. And for me, one of the reasons I wanted to do the book was that I thought, when I really got to talk to Ted, I really thought he had an interesting career trajectory where he started off as an artist. He was in a band called Harper's Bazaar, which was kind of like the Association. They were kind of a soft rock band. They had a couple of hits in the late 60s. They were on Warner Brothers Records. And then he went to work for Warner Brothers. And so Ted grew up this kid who was a jazz geek, and transitioned into this Beatlesque, soft rock pop band he was in. And then when it ended up becoming a tape listener for Warner Brothers, so basically the bottom of the corporate ladder, he got a job there and discovered the Doobie Brothers, and kind of worked his way up, did Van Morrison, did Little Feat. And I really thought about it would kind of cover his life, a whole period of time, going back actually to, through the 1950s into the 60s, and then up through his peak years at Warner Brothers and up to the end, where Warner Brothers is kind of falling apart, and Ted ends up leaving the company in the late 90s. And so I thought it kind of would put a whole period of time that I was really interested in as a music fan, beyond the fact that the obvious thing too, obviously, was I was very interested in hearing his take on the whole Van Halen saga. And he has the unusual perspective of being a guy who's not only signed Van Halen, but actually worked with Eddie to produce things like Private Life, which people may have forgotten. He did a second Private Life record with Eddie that came out in 1990. He did the Fuck record.
He was the George Martin of Van Halen. I mean,
right. And then the whole relationship with Don Landee, and so to me, I felt like it would let me continue to do the Van Halen part of it that I'd be interested in. I thought people might want to follow along with that with the Van Halen Rising book, but also kind of broaden the path, a look at his career, and kind of, I hope, give people a look into what a producer does, and also what it was like to be in the middle of that hit-making environment. Because it was, Warner Brothers Records was a very special company. They were kind of in some ways like Apple. I'm not trying to make them into like something like, oh, they were like so warm and fuzzy. I mean, they were still a record company looking to make money, but they really did nurture a lot of artists that otherwise probably would never have stayed on a record label. Like, for example, Randy Newman was a perfect example. Like, Randy Newman didn't really sell anything till Short People, and he would make these records and they wouldn't sell. But Randy Newman was a good songwriter, and the guys running Warner Brothers kind of knew that. And eventually, of course, it all kind of paid off. Or Randy did a lot of stuff for Disney, and he wrote these songs that were successful by the late 70s. But they had this idea that, like, you keep Ry Cooder on the label, even though Ry Cooder doesn't sell, because Ry Cooder talented, and we might lose money on Ry Cooder, but we're going to make a crap load of money on Black Sabbath.
And that's something that's so gone. Yeah, the days of nurturing artists until they come into their own is basically gone. I mean,
and so that's kind of that for me too, was all part of the thing I was interested in, is that you have this tension, and Ted was sort of a guy who was in the midst of all that, knew all these people, and kind of said, he's got had a front row seats for some very entertaining things. So I'm trying to get all that stuff.
Ted Templeman is absolutely a chapter unto himself of rock and roll. Absolutely.
Make sure I say too that Ted is just the greatest guy. It's been such an honor and such a great experience for me to get to know him and become friends with him, and just to let him tell me these stories. It's just it's nice to have, when you end up meeting people who you admire through their work. Yeah, we've all had those experiences where you've met people where you're like, oh God, this person is not like I'm really bummed this person is like this, and he's not not like that at all. He's just been super. super generous with his time, and also super generous in sort of giving other people credit.
Well, I'm going to be looking forward to that. And Greg, I've certainly appreciated talking to you. It's been extremely enlightening for one, entertaining. You filled in some blanks for me that I've been curious about. So it's been.
I appreciate you taking the time and take the time to read the book. I always like people who are willing to take the time to read my book. I really am grateful. It's a great compliment to anyone who says like, "Oh, I read your book." So thank you so much.
Oh, I burned through the book in 2 days. You kidding me? Yeah. But yeah, so it's great. So once again, anybody who doesn't have it, Van Halen Rising, look forward to your book next year on Ted Templeman. And once again, you're always welcome back with anything to share, and we'll be keeping in touch.
Hey, thanks a lot.
All right,
Speak
thank
soon.
you, Greg. Thank you.